Notice that position dictates function, that we're in this position of hip to shoulder separation, right? And hip to shoulder separation is one of the key principles in biomechanics, because the timing of hip to shoulder separation is how you maximize kinematic sequencing. And that's, like I said, the timing of hip to shoulder separation and how the energy is being transferred. So that when we're doing plyos, right, plyos is more of a connection tool, right? And so when we want to talk about proper sequencing and proper flow, we've got to learn how to sequence and put our position in certain positions, because positions dictate function, right? Structure indicates function, but positions dictate function, right? And so if we can understand the difference between that, learn how to blend that then together to allow your body to find the path of least resistance, that's kind of how you're optimizing mechanics, right? Because again, biomechanics, bio is the internal performance piece, right? It's how the brain connects to the spinal cord, to the central nervous system, to allow involuntary, voluntary movement of then our body. And so then it transfers to external performance, right? The mechanic piece. That's why with pitching mechanics and pitching in general, right, it's about finding the path of least resistance. And if you can understand how to find the path of least resistance throughout your body, it's going to allow you to, like I said, optimize your mechanics, right? Because if I were to line up 50 MLB pitchers, you're going to notice that every single guy does something completely different with their body. And that's because certain structures is going to have certain indicators towards their function, right? Well, when they can become aware of that and then learn how to move, like, right, if I have a lack of internal rotation and I notice that I'm more biased and I'm trying to set up more external rotation wise, right, I'm going to have a longer path of internal rotation, and now it's going to cause more room for error in the chain, especially when we're moving down the mound, because the mound has gravity, it has a slope, it's pulling us down. And so if I'm not stronger than the forces of gravity that is being placed on my body when I'm throwing, I'll never even learn how to not only control my body, but allow my body to put itself in better positions, right? So most guys are using plyo balls as a quick fix tool. It's a connection base. It's understanding how your body moves and allowing your body to feel those coordinated movements. That's why when I see younger athletes using plyo balls, they just yank them and let it rip, like with a pivot pick, right? It's a pivot pick is a perfect example, right? They'll do this all the time. They'll be here, and then they'll push the elbow out in front and then ripping down into pronation, and you're putting so much valgus torque here, right? But with the pivot pick, it's a connection base. It's to understand and teach how your body's moving towards the target. It's really trying to time up that thoracic extension, that layback in that glove, boom, pulling together. So when you're here doing a pivot pick, you're up here timing now these two movements. And then pronation happens, and if you want to be athletic, you can get that little turn into it, right? And so, again, like, everything comes down to allowing your body to find the path of least resistance, right? And everybody's mechanics are different. But, again, like, a lot of people out there create methods that they make it look like it's their way or the highway, and we came up with a certain principle, right? It's just, no, it's a method that you want athletes to follow. But that's why things also need to be individualized, because, again, like throughout the time year, guys are on different time frames and different ramp ups and deload or a shutdown. Like, there's a lot of different, attributes to an athlete's time frame and their timeline, right? And that's why we teach athletes here at BSF how to properly prepare their year, how to properly balance the weight room, the throwing, everything like that too. And so it's an important concept, and it's important understanding that plyo balls is not a quick fix tool. It's just not. And when you see a lot of guys out there using this as that quick fix, it's because we've created a culture here in America that shiny object syndrome, that quick fix mentality, right? Like, that's what's going to get me there. And more of it's just like, you don't know how to delay gratification. If you're not learning how to delay gratification through this process, right, like, chances are you're going to be in this hamster wheel of chasing mechanics and chasing positions and chasing, the velocity. But again, like, yes, velocity comes with time, and it comes with being in a structured program that obviously has individualized attributes, right? Not just, oh, it's our way or the highway. You follow these certain drills, and then you have to do and be robotic and be the same like everybody else. Like, no, you got to learn who your athlete is. You got to know how they learn. And so again, when you're with athletes, right, and you see younger athletes with their metrics and their strength numbers, right, they're not even close to where they need to be at yet, but we think this is what's going to solve the problem. The problem is they just don't know how to move through their body. They don't understand. They don't even understand, right, the strength attributes that has to go on the mound, right? Like, strength is everything. And it's also because, like I said earlier, you're on the mound with gravity pulling you down. And so not only do you have your own body weight, but you got tons of gravity pulling down that body weight. That's a lot of force. And if you're not even producing proper strength and force metrics in our metric testing, what we do here with our metric camps at BSF, like, you're gonna then start seeing then the athlete break down mechanic wise, because he didn't have the proper strength and internal performance to then execute to an external performance, right? And it's like, but yet we want to place the emphasis on it's his arm. It's like, no, it's his whole entire body. That's why we test their metrics to see, are they stronger than the forces of gravity that's being applied? But most athletes out there will say that strength is a cookie cutter answer. Well, I back it up and say, define strength. Define strength. What is strength? And sometimes they just say, they sit there and they don't know. That's why we like to educate guys on understanding what is strength. It's learning how to position your body in certain planes throughout this triplanar movement that we get into as pitchers, right? We go through the sagittal, frontal, transverse plane. And not only that, like teaching how to deviate our center mass in the weight room, with heels elevated stuff, or even like Henny attachments on the barbell where you're in more of a horizontal plane position with the trunk, right? That's why like with a reverse lunge, when guys are doing a reverse lunge, right, the pelvis is a straight vertical movement, right? Like pitching, we're more horizontal, at least in pitching, and even in sprinting and anything that we do in baseball, right? It's very center mass deviated, and so you got to train the body right, and that's why we say, well, define strength, because they don't understand what really strength is, right? When younger athletes think strength, they think big bodybuilder. Like, yes, there's a time and place to get a nice little arm for arm pump, feel good in the weight room, get some size, but it's teaching your body how to be strong in all planes of motion, and that's what makes a great athlete. That's what creates. And that's what separates, guys from college and professional, right? Because again, there's certain metrics that are involved in this that we need to be at if we want to be able to be strong enough to handle the forces of gravity that's being placed on my body when I'm on the mound throwing, but also the amount of force and stress that gets placed on our arms when we throw. And when I mean that, it's understand that when we're throwing, right, when we go into front foot strike and we go into max layback, that's a passive range of motion. And that passive range of motion, the only thing that's being relied on and relied upon is these passive connective tissues. And over time, what you start to see is that the tissue starts to fray. And so when it starts to fray, that's where all those microtrauma tears start to happen in the fascia, in the tissue. So if we don't have good tissue quality, right, that's a problem, because the energy that's being transferred through our body originally is first coming from fascia, and then it produces power and elastic recoil power to the muscle from an internal performance now to the external performance mechanism of biomechanics. And so the fascia is eccentrically loading and concentrically contracting. But where the stress is being occurred is in the eccentric movements. And so when we're throwing, that's why pitchers are more vulnerable to injuries, because pitchers will exceed end ranges more often throughout our throwing delivery, right? We got end ranges when we hit hip flexion, right? That's why you see our lead leg block stronger than our drive leg in unilateral exercises, because again, when we're sitting into constant hip flexion, rotation, extension, you're deteriorating that tissue and that hip capsule in this region, right? But again, like that's why the structure indicates function and stuff, and how positions dictate function, because it's like this is a vulnerable area, right? And so if this is weak at these end ranges, then you're gonna see a breakdown of the chain. So you got an end range here in hip flexion, right? And so then when you go into rotation extension, right, that's a lot of eccentric movement, because then when you're moving through hip to shoulder separation, right, this scap retraction to flip the arm up into abduction is another distraction force that's being occurred here at the front part of the shoulder, right, where the long head of the bicep tendon lies, but also the other muscles, the anterior deltoid and all the other muscles that attach this brachial plexus region. So that's another distraction force. And then you're flipping up the arm, so now you're creating medial epicondyle elbow torque, right? And the medial epicondyle, right, it's dependent on the static position of the shoulder and internal rotation. And so if I'm more preset in internal rotation, which a culture in America, we text, we're on the phone, we're always dominant here, you're gonna notice that in order to flip my hand and my arm up in supination, I gotta have there's more torque here. And then we go into passive, which is another end range distraction force happening, right? And that's at our end ranges is where we're the weakest at, but our forearms get parallel to the ground because it's passive. Watch a slow-mo of an MLB or even a college or even a little league pitcher. It's all passive. Now think about it, we're the only sport that uses the exact same size baseball and weight for an 8-year-old and a 24-year-old. Just because distance changes doesn't mean the amount of force that's still being applied in a passive range of motion is the same, because it is. And that's why you see growth plate issues happening at younger ages, is because that tissue wasn't built up, the muscle endurance wasn't there, the muscle fibers, just the strength and the contractile force of the tissue of that strength wasn't there, because there wasn't training, because our reverse engineering thought of player development is, let's go play, and all these travel balls, and not train, and teach the foundations and the basics for younger guys to handle the baseball, let alone plyos. And that's why we have to understand that plyos is a middle ground. But however, right, so we got layback, and then when we go through pronation, acceleration, deceleration, this deceleration phase is another distraction force, because you're internally torquing the humerus out of this glenohumeral head socket. And so the only thing that's stopping that, obviously all of your decelerator muscles, but the only thing that's stopping that are those tissues. And then obviously, since I'm always going to constant trunk eccentric deceleration, right? You got your spinal erector, your erector spinae, you got all these muscles eccentrically loading this way, then we start to tend to lose range of motion back this way through that counter rotational stage, which is why when throughout the season, you'll start to see athletes lose their kinematic sequencing, lose hip to shoulder separation, and that's what then causes the back hip and the arm to start to drag, more distraction forces, but then more of a supinated wrist position, more horizontal, missing arm side, missing glove side, it's cutting. It's because you're fatigued, which is a strength thing, right? So it's just understanding that. And so that's why plyo balls is the tool. Can't have athletes just yank them around everywhere. Got to learn how to balance volume and intensity. If we can balance volume and intensity throughout the week, throughout your training session, to then prepare you for that live outing, your red high intent day, which is what we use here, between 80 and 100% of intensity. Like your red day is your live. You know, maybe Tuesday, you know, might be a nice little live, you know, or a short box, 15 pitch short box, right? To then build you back up on the 2 days recovery, to then prepare for the day 5 red day, or you do day 6 red day, like your high intent. So it's understanding how to balance volume and intensity, not only with plyos, but baseballs, but knowing who your athlete is and do they need it. We have athletes here that they're up 12 miles an hour without plyos, and we got guys obviously, you know, who are strong enough and that they can handle plyos. You know, their velocity is also up too, but those guys are going to be more probably connection based, right? And understanding that yes, there's a certain time to, you know, get some intent behind these, but again, it's a tool. And so it's really just learning how to maximize that tool, but then connecting it to the science, the bio, and then, you know, when we start throwing, right, and then pitching, now we use the TrackMan. We use the TrackMan for great, you know, pitch tracking data, and it tells us a lot. Numbers tell a story. It tells us how well his pitches are moving, vertical, horizontal, right? Trying to get a guy, you know, a good pitch, a good sequence, so he can split the plate. So now the hitter has, you know, 40 inches to cover, right? Teaching these kids like how to pitch too. So that's why I invest in the TrackMan in our bullpen sessions, and guys are scheduling TrackMans and stuff like that. That's where that one-on-one comes into play, and that's why we have performance coaches here who, you know, some are ex-professional athletes, right? That they learned that stuff too with their pitch metrics, and they learned how to read that data and really help optimize certain mechanical cues and certain mechanical tips with pitch grips, and learning how to leverage the lace, maybe get a feel of like learn how to throw the back palm at the catcher, like things like that to optimize spin, to get true spin reading, because some kids say, hey, I throw a curve, but it's really a slider profile. They don't know that. They weren't taught that. So now we're learning how to kind of blend everything together here, and that's our goal. And so I think if the more we can learn how to do that, and then also like teach athletes when they're indoors how to be competitive, how to train, you know, like it would be live, like that's why we use our bullpen levels. Like our bullpen level 4 is to get the athlete ready to go, build the heart rate up, make the situation high intent. You know, that's why on our fields here at the Bodome, at the Bo Jackson's Elite Sports Dome, we have live AB fields where guys can go throw live. So we got all these resources here. So we try and help guys not become complacent in indoor training, and then when they see, you know, live, right? Like that's why you see a lot of guys struggle with heart rate and breathing issues, is because they haven't necessarily prepared the body, not only physically but mentally, to transfer that. And that's something that we stand on here, is where we're trying to balance it all. And that's why the only way, if you can do any of that stuff, you gotta be in a routine. You gotta learn how to have structure. But you also have to have a routine and structure that is also backed up by, you know, a lot of the science and a lot of the case evidence and a lot of case studies that, and a lot of data tracking and the data collecting that goes behind this. And then at the end of the day, also us as coaches are more mentors. It's teaching these guys how to deal with failure. That's why we host, you know, an educational night before guys head for in-season, whether you're professional, college, or high school, and giving guys mental cues and teaching them how to handle failure, things like that. That is what we stand on here. And that's why what we do here is try and provide guys with structure, with routines. That's why we developed like a 3-day sustainability guideline that incentivizes athletes to communicate to the coach of knowing when they're throwing, so then they can prepare the day before, the day of, and the day after. And that's why we made that little guideline when they're in season around their training. It's to prepare for 72 hours, but obviously the days, right before that, day before, right, they're still training and building up. So it's like, all right, but it incentivizes them to prepare their bodies the right way, to prime and recover that central nervous system the right way. It incentivizes them to communicate, and communication is key. And I think that's also why, like on our day of, they have certain things, they have certain things for like what starters would go through. They would have things for bullpen guys like before the game, because most bullpen guys are doing things before the game. So doing proper things for that, managing intensity and the volume and the throwing. And then when their name's called upon, right, what's the most important thing that you need to do now to get the body ready, to get the central nervous system ready, to get the body coordinated to then, again, produce explosive, powerful movements that creates 2 outcomes, command and velocity, right? That's what we need, okay? So, and I think that's why, and then, teaching them with the weight room stuff, right? That's why what we do here really well at, even with the weight room. Shout out to Brett Vallon. He's our head strength and conditioning coordinator here on the BSF performance side. He also does the positional players as well. But however, right, like balancing out the weight room, right, in-season, off-season training, how to manage it for the throwing, that being blended together is huge. That's why, here at BSF, we got the BSF performance for the positional players, the hitters, right, infielders, catchers, even the throwing programming and all the things that we do in the pitching performance. We have that stuff for the positional guys as well. So there's a lot that we do here. There's a lot that goes into this. And this is what makes this place special, but it's a lot about it teaching the athletes, teaching them how to actually dial into understanding what mechanics are, right? How to optimize them naturally, right? Like think about it. If you're in the mirror, looking at yourself in the mirror every single day and wondering if I'm starting to get a 6-pack or not, right? It's like if you're looking at yourself every single day in the mirror, you're never gonna notice the changes, right? Like when I'd go off to school and I come back like 4 or 5 months later, like I saw physical differences in my siblings, and they didn't believe that because they see themselves every day. No different with mechanics. If you're always looking at, your mechanics every single day on video, right? And every single day on video, you're trying to find what the problem is and what the issue is, right? And you're looking almost for like an answer or something, or wondering, why am I not throwing hard, or why this, why that, which isn't a bad thing, but when you overanalyze that, like you might miss something, right? And so I go back to that analogy of when you're looking at yourself in the mirror every single day, you're gonna miss something. But if you're looking at your mechanics every single day, and I've been a victim of that, and there's been times that obviously every guy gets sometimes domed up, like that happens. And so if you can be disciplined and have a routine and have a structure of, hey, I'm gonna take video on day 1 and then maybe day 14 and assess every 2 weeks, or day 1, day 30, like on the mound wise when you're going 100%, because you going at 50% of intensity, right, and trying to replicate what your mechanics look like at 100% of intensity, it's ridiculous. Like you're never gonna be able to repeat that exact same. So realize why the low days are low, keep the high days high. So when you're trying to assess your mechanics on video and stuff like that, you should be doing like day 1 and day 14 or 30 on those next high intent days. Be like, hey, what did I get better at? What was the result? How was command? How was first pitch? Was it a strike? What was that first pitch strike, ratio, right? Like how was the off speed, right? But overall, like how'd you feel? And then you start comparing. That's why I use the TrackMan. You look at the data, you look at the metrics. Like that is such a huge component of making your mechanics naturally get better without you getting so domed up. Now you're teaching a kid how to pitch. You're teaching them now pitch design, the metrics, and allowing them to trust the training. And that's why we say everything that you do before and after, the throwing is gonna then dictate the way you move when you go and throw that next day. And that's what we stand on here. That is our pride, right? We're training athletes inside out here. We're changing outcomes, we're changing lives. And we ask that you guys come join the journey, right? It's an exciting movement that we have through all 3 locations, right? We got one in Bensonville and we got one in Columbus, Ohio. Right, so we got BSF Pitching Performance, BSF Performance, and all the Bo Jackson's Elite Sports Zone facilities that we have here. Again, this conversation, this longer type of talk video is for you guys. So I hope you guys walk away with some great knowledge, some great information, and great things that we're also doing here for our communities. So if you guys want to join the movement, join the journey, join us here at BSF Pitching Performance at Bo Jackson's Elite Sports.